The screaming started at 7 hours, Terran Standard Time, when the first Vox transmission from Ulanor reached the astropathic choir on Terra. The psychic shriek that accompanied it killed 17 astropaths instantly and left another 43 in permanent catatonic states, their minds shattered by contact with something so alien and malevolent that the human psyche simply could not process its existence. But worse than the psychic trauma was the message itself, delivered in perfect high Gothic by a voice that no human throat had ever produced. "We are returned. The Imperium of the False Emperor ends now." High Lord Commander Lansung was in his private chambers when the emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the Imperial Palace. The sound was one he had not heard in over 3 centuries of service. The deep, resonant tone reserved for threats to terror itself. He was dressed and armed within minutes, his bolt pistol heavy at his side as he made his way through corridors filled with running figures and panicked Vox chatter. The War Council chamber was already packed with officials when he arrived, their faces pale in the harsh lumen light. Admiral Korath stood at the central display, pointing to tactical readouts that made no sense according to any doctrine Lansung had ever studied. The numbers were wrong. The scale was impossible. The implications were horrifying. "Ulanor system has gone silent," Korath announced without preamble. "All communication ceased 18 hours ago. Reconnaissance flights confirm massive orbital activity. Ship movements on a scale that..." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "My lords, the readings suggest a battle fleet larger than anything in Imperial records." Lansung studied the data streams flowing across the display screens. Fleet strength estimates that climbed into the thousands. Energy signatures that registered as weapons capable of cracking planets. Construction activity that suggested the enemy possessed industrial capacity that dwarfed even the forge worlds of Mars. It was not possible. Nothing in the galaxy possessed such resources. "Origin?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be worse than any threat they had faced before. "Orc," Korath replied. Confirmed greenskin signatures across all sensor readings, but the organization, the scale, the coordination. This is not like anything we have encountered before. Intelligence suggests a single Wah has united multiple sectors under one command structure. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Every person in the chamber understood what those words meant. Orc warfare was terrifying precisely because of its chaotic, disorganized nature. Individual Wah could consume entire systems, but they inevitably turned on themselves as rival war bosses competed for dominance. A united Orc empire, organized under single leadership and operating with strategic planning, represented a threat that the Imperium had not faced since the Great Crusade. "Size estimates?" Lansung asked, dreading the answer. Preliminary calculations suggest a force of several trillion orcs supported by industrial infrastructure spanning dozens of star systems. Fleet strength appears to be in excess of 10,000 capital ships, with support vessels numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Korath's voice remained steady, but the data he was delivering painted a picture of absolute catastrophe. "My lords, this is not a raid or an incursion. This is a war of extermination." The Orc known to Imperial intelligence as the Beast had been little more than a footnote in sector reports for decades. Another greenskin warlord among thousands, distinguished only by his unusual ability to maintain control over rival war bosses for extended periods. But something had changed on the dead world of Ulanor, where the Emperor himself had once declared victory over the greatest Orc threat the galaxy had ever seen. Something had awakened in the depths of that scarred planet and begun calling the scattered tribes of Orcs back to their ancestral home. What emerged was not just another Wah, but the resurrection of the Orc Empire in its most terrible form. The beast was larger than any Orc previously recorded, standing over 10 meters tall and possessed of an intelligence that allowed him to see beyond the simple joy of battle that drove his species. He understood strategy. He grasped the concept of logistics. Most terrifyingly, he had learned to use the Imperium's own weaknesses against it. The first attacks had been calculated and precise, targeting key forge worlds and recruiting centers with surgical precision. While the Imperium's attention was focused on these obvious threats, the real work was happening in the darkness between systems. Entire sectors were going quiet. Their populations either fled or consumed by the green tide that swept across them like a plague of violence. By the time Terra received word of what was happening, the Orc Empire controlled territory encompassing over 1,000 systems. Their industrial capacity had grown beyond calculation. Their fleets darkened space in formations that stretched from one end of star systems to the other, and at the center of it all sat Ulanor, transformed into a fortress world whose defenses made the Iron Cage look like a training exercise. Captain Thane of the Imperial Fists stood before the tactical display in the command center of the battle barge Eternal Vigil and tried to comprehend what his scouts were reporting. The reconnaissance data from the Ulanor system defied every assumption about Orc military capability. The planet itself had been turned into a weapon, its surface covered with weapons batteries and orbital defense platforms that could turn entire fleets into scrap metal. "Void shields?" he asked, though he knew the answer would be worse than he hoped. "Planet-wide coverage," replied Scout Sergeant Caney. "Multiple overlapping layers. Power output suggests they could withstand sustained bombardment from our entire fleet without significant degradation. And the weapon emplacements," he gestured to the tactical display where thousands of red markers indicated confirmed artillery positions. "Each battery appears to be equivalent to a battleship's main guns. Conservative estimates suggest they could destroy anything in orbit within minutes of entering firing range." Thane studied the readings and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was not the crude, ramshackle construction typical of Orc engineering. The placement of defensive positions showed strategic thinking and long-term planning. The power distribution networks were efficient and redundant. Even the orbital patterns of their battle fleets demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested professional military leadership. "The beast has learned," he said, voicing what every space marine in the chamber was thinking. "This is not the random violence of a typical Orc war. This is warfare conducted by someone who understands how the Imperium fights and has planned accordingly." The implications were staggering. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had relied on the inherent weaknesses of Orc society to contain their threat. Their internal conflicts, their lack of strategic vision, their tendency to fight each other as much as their enemies. But if those limitations had been removed, if the Orcs had learned to fight with the same discipline and coordination that defined Imperial tactics, then the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted fundamentally. The first major engagement came at Ardamant, a fortress world that guarded one of the main shipping routes between Terra and the Eastern Fringe. The Imperial defenders were confident in their preparations. Their defenses had held against countless threats over the millennia. But what emerged from the warp was unlike anything they had faced before. The Orc attack fleet numbered over 3,000 ships, from crude assault craft to massive battle fortresses that dwarfed Imperial battleships. But it was not their size that broke the defenders' morale. It was their organization. They advanced in perfect formation, their fire coordinated with mathematical precision, their assault patterns following tactical doctrines that would have impressed even Space Marine commanders. The orbital battle lasted 6 hours. At the end, Ardamantua's defensive fleet was debris drifting in the void, and the planet's surface was under assault by the largest Orc invasion force in recorded history. The garrison fought with desperate courage, every man and woman knowing that retreat was impossible and surrender was not an option. But courage means nothing when facing an enemy that outnumbers you 1,000 to 1 and possesses weapons that can level mountains. The final Vox transmission from Ardamantua was brief and chilling. "This is Governor Multhorn. The capital has fallen. The enemy is at the palace gates. May the Emperor forgive us all." then silence, and another Imperial world went dark. On Terra, the High Lords of the Imperium gathered in emergency session as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. World after world was falling to the green tide, their defenses swept away by Orc forces operating with unprecedented coordination and tactical awareness. The enemy was not just conquering territory, they were systematically dismantling the Imperium's ability to respond to the threat. Forge worlds were targeted first, their irreplaceable manufacturing capabilities destroyed or captured before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. Communication hubs were seized or demolished, isolating sectors from central command. Supply routes were severed, leaving Imperial forces cut off from resupply and reinforcement. It was a campaign of strategic brilliance executed by an enemy that the Imperium had always dismissed as nothing more than savage beasts. "We need the legions," Admiral Korath stated flatly, his words carrying the weight of terrible necessity. The standard Imperial Guard response is insufficient for this scale of threat. We need the Adeptus Astartes deployed in full chapter strength across every threatened sector. High Lord Commander Lansung nodded grimly. Orders have been sent to every chapter in the galaxy. All current operations are suspended. Every Space Marine is to return to their fortress monasteries for immediate deployment to the war zone. He paused, considering the magnitude of what he was authorizing. We are mobilizing every asset the Imperium possesses. This is total war. But even as the orders went out, more worlds fell to the green tide. The Orcs were not waiting for Imperial reinforcements to arrive. They were pressing their advantage, striking at targets across a front that spanned half the galaxy. The speed of their advance was impossible by any conventional understanding of logistics and supply. Yet somehow they maintained the momentum, their forces appearing in systems that should have been beyond their reach. Captain General Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes stood in the chamber of the Astronomicon and watched the holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated worlds under Orc control. Yellow showed systems under attack. Green marked territories still loyal to the Emperor. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Imperium was losing. "How many?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Conservative estimates suggest we have lost contact with over 2,000 worlds in the past 6 months," replied the tech adept managing the display. "Of those, approximately 60% show confirmed Orc occupation. The remainder have simply gone silent, their fate unknown. 2,000 worlds. Billions upon billions of human lives lost or enslaved. Industrial capacity that had taken millennia to build, swept away in months. The Imperium was bleeding to death, and the wound was spreading faster than it could be treated. The beast's strategy is becoming clear," Valoris continued, studying the pattern of attacks. "He is not seeking to conquer the Imperium in the traditional sense. He is seeking to destroy it. Every world he takes, every fleet he defeats, weakens our ability to respond to further attacks. We are being systematically dismantled." The comparison to the tactics used during the Horus Heresy was inescapable, but during that dark period, the threat had been singular, focused on the person of Warmaster Horus and his corrupted legions. The beast represented something different. This was not betrayal from within, but conquest from without. An external threat that had learned to use the Imperium's own methods against it. Reports from the front lines painted a picture of warfare conducted with inhuman efficiency. Orc forces appeared in systems with perfect intelligence about Imperial defenses, striking at weak points with surgical precision. Their supply lines operated with mechanical reliability, supporting advances that spanned dozens of star systems simultaneously. Most disturbing of all, they demonstrated tactical flexibility, adapting their methods to counter Imperial responses with startling speed. The Salamanders chapter was among the first to engage the beast's forces directly. their strike cruisers intercepting an Orc fleet heading for the Forge world of Nocturne. Captain Tekel had expected a typical greenskin battle, chaotic, violent, but ultimately containable through superior Imperial discipline and tactics. What he found instead nearly cost him his entire company. The Orcs fought with perfect coordination, their ship formations maintained under fire with a precision that rivaled the Imperial Navy. Their boarding actions were planned and executed with tactical brilliance, targeting specific systems aboard Imperial vessels with an understanding of starship design that suggested detailed intelligence gathering. Most shocking of all, they demonstrated adaptability, changing their tactics in real time to counter salamander responses. "They are learning as we fight," Tekel reported in his after-action summary. "Every engagement provides them with data about our capabilities, our tactics, our weaknesses. They are not just winning battles, they are studying us." The psychological impact of fighting such an enemy was devastating. Imperial forces had always relied on their superiority over Orc opponents in matters of planning and coordination. When that advantage was removed, when facing greenskins that fought with the same discipline and tactical awareness as Space Marines, morale crumbled. Units that had never known defeat found themselves retreating from battles they should have won. The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Inquisitor Veritas of the Ordo Xenos had been studying captured Orc equipment from the Beast's forces when he noticed something that chilled his blood. The weapons were not just improved versions of typical greenskin technology. They were perfect. Every component was manufactured to exact specifications with tolerances that rivaled the best Imperial engineering. The metal alloys showed molecular-level precision in their composition. Even more disturbing, the equipment showed no signs of the random mechanical failures that plagued all Orc technology. These weapons would function reliably for centuries without maintenance. This level of precision is impossible for Orc engineering, Veritas reported to the Ordo Xenos Conclave. Their entire technological base depends on their psychic field, making poorly constructed equipment function through collective belief. But these weapons do not require that field. They are genuinely superior to their Imperial equivalents. The implication was staggering. The Beast had not simply learned to organize Orc forces more effectively. He had somehow transcended the fundamental limitations that had always contained the Orc threat. Their technology was no longer dependent on their primitive understanding of engineering. Their tactics were no longer constrained by their inability to think beyond immediate gratification. They had become something new, something that combined the physical advantages of Orc physiology with intellectual capabilities that matched or exceeded human capacity. Further investigation revealed the source of this transformation. Deep in the core of Ulanor, the Beast had discovered something left behind from the ancient war that had raged across that world during the Great Crusade. Archaeological evidence suggested the presence of Xenos technology, possibly dating back to the Dark Age of technology, that had been influencing the development of Orc society on the planet for thousands of years. The artifact, whatever it was, appeared to be enhancing the Beast's intellectual capacity, while simultaneously boosting the effectiveness of Orc technology throughout his empire. It was not corruption in the traditional sense understood by the Imperium, but evolution. The Beast was becoming something that transcended the normal limitations of his species. This discovery changed Imperial strategy completely. The war was no longer about containing an unusually large and well-organized Orc war. It was about preventing the emergence of a new form of greenskin that could threaten the very existence of humanity. The Beast had to be stopped before his enhancements could spread to other Orc populations throughout the galaxy. The Imperial response was unprecedented in scope and scale. Every available chapter of Space Marines was deployed to the war zone. The Imperial Navy committed over half its total fleet strength to the campaign. Even the usually secretive Adeptus Mechanicus emerged from their forge worlds in force. their titans and battle servitors joining the massive military buildup. But as Imperial forces gathered for what would become known as the Second Ulanor Crusade, the beast struck at the heart of the Imperium itself. A massive Orc fleet emerged from the warp at the edge of the Sol system, having somehow bypassed every defensive position and early warning station that guarded the approaches to humanity's birth world. The attack on the Sol system was the beast's masterpiece of strategic thinking. Rather than attempting a direct assault on Terra's legendary defenses, the Orc fleet targeted Mars. The Forge World's orbital shipyards and manufacturing facilities were vital to the Imperial war effort, and their loss would cripple humanity's ability to replace the ships and equipment being consumed in the war against the Orc Empire. The Martian defense fleet fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant not just their own destruction, but the potential collapse of the Imperium's technological base. For 3 days, the space around Mars burned with weapons fire as Imperial and Orc vessels clashed in the largest naval engagement since the Horus Heresy. But the outcome was never really in doubt. The beast's forces outnumbered the defenders by more than 10 to 1, and their tactical coordination allowed them to concentrate overwhelming firepower against individual Imperial ships. When the orbital defenses finally fell, the Orc landing began. Millions of greenskins descended on the sacred soil of Mars, their advance supported by weapons that should not have existed in their technological base. But these were not the crude, unreliable devices typical of Orc engineering. These were precision instruments of destruction that functioned with mechanical perfection. The Skitarii legions of Mars fought like the machines they emulated, their augmented bodies and weapons pushing beyond normal operational parameters in desperate attempts to slow the Orc advance. Tech priests activated ancient defensive systems that had slumbered for millennia, turning entire sectors of the Forge world into killing fields. But nothing could stop the green tide from reaching the deepest levels of the planetary infrastructure. When the beast's forces reached the core forges where the most sacred technologies of the Adeptus Mechanicus were housed, something unprecedented happened. Rather than destroying the facilities in typical Orc fashion, they began to study them. Greenskin engineers, if such a term could be applied to their species, examined Imperial manufacturing techniques with analytical precision. They were not conquering Mars to loot its resources. They were conquering it to learn its secrets. The loss of Mars sent shockwaves throughout the Imperium. The Forge world was more than just a major industrial center. It was the spiritual heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the birthplace of technologies that had sustained humanity through 10,000 years of warfare. Its fall represented a catastrophic blow to both Imperial military capacity and morale, but worse was yet to come. Within days of the Martian conquest, Orc fleets began appearing throughout the Sol system. They did not attack Terra directly, but instead established a blockade that cut the throne world off from the rest of the galaxy. No ships could enter or leave the system without facing overwhelming Orc firepower. Humanity's capital was effectively under siege. The psychological impact on Terra was immediate and devastating. For 10 millennia, the throne world had been considered absolutely secure, protected by defenses that could withstand any conceivable threat. The idea that enemies could not only reach the Sol system but actually establish control over its space lanes was almost incomprehensible to the billions of Imperial citizens who called Terra home. Panic spread through the hive cities as food supplies began to run low and communication with the outside galaxy was severed. The Adeptus Arbites struggled to maintain order as riots broke out in the lower levels of the hives, their population turning desperate as the reality of their situation became clear. Even in the Imperial Palace itself, there were whispers of despair among officials who had never imagined that the seat of Imperial power could be threatened. In this darkest hour, salvation came from an unexpected source. The primarchs had been gone for millennia, lost to death, disappearance, or the corrupting influence of chaos. But now, as the Imperium faced its greatest crisis since the Horus heresy, one of the Emperor's sons returned. Vulcan, primarch of the Salamander's Legion, emerged from the depths of Nocturne where he had been sleeping in preparation for humanity's hour of greatest need. His resurrection was not a triumphant return, but a desperate awakening triggered by the proximity of extinction that threatened his father's realm. He was changed by his long slumber, marked by visions of futures that must be prevented and possibilities that required immediate action. The Primarch's first act upon awakening was to issue a call to arms that resonated across the galaxy through psychic channels that bypassed normal communications. Every Loyalist Space Marine chapter received the message directly into the minds of their leadership, a summons that could not be ignored or denied. The sons of the Emperor were being recalled to defend their father's domain in its hour of greatest peril. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Chapters that had been scattered across the galaxy, fighting their own battles, abandoned their current operations and began converging on the Sol system. Battle barges and strike cruisers emerged from the warp in steady streams, their holds filled with space marines ready to die in defense of Terra. It was the largest gathering of Adeptus Astartes since the Great Crusade. Vulcan himself led the first attempt to break the Orc blockade of Terra. His battle barge, the Flame-wrought, emerged from the warp at the head of a fleet comprising over 200 Space Marine vessels. The sight of a living Primarch commanding Imperial forces had an immediate impact on morale throughout the Sol system. Here was proof that the Emperor still watched over humanity, that the darkest hour had not yet arrived. The naval battle that followed lasted for 18 hours and covered the entire space between Mars and Terra. Vulcan's tactical genius was evident in every maneuver, his forces striking at the Orc fleet with precision that gradually eroded their numerical advantage. But it was the Primarch's personal intervention that turned the tide of battle. When the Flame-wrought was boarded by a massive Orc assault force, Vulcan met them in single combat. His hammer Doomtreader had been reforged during his long sleep, its adamantine head now inscribed with wards that had been revealed to him in prophetic visions. Each blow shattered Orc bodies and equipment with equal ease, clearing paths through enemy formations that allowed his Space Marines to advance. But it was when Vulcan faced the Orc warboss commanding the boarding party that his true power was revealed. The greenskin was massive even by the standards of his species, his body augmented with cybernetic implants that increased his size and strength to inhuman levels. The duel should have been evenly matched, two giants of their respective species testing their might against each other. Instead, Vulcan ended the fight with a single blow that not only killed the warboss, but sent psychic shockwaves throughout the Orc fleet. The beast had enhanced his followers with technology that linked their minds in a crude approximation of the psychic network that connected all greenskins. But this network worked both ways, and the death of a major leader sent ripples of confusion and dismay through every Orc vessel in the system. The temporary disruption was enough to break the coordination that had made the beast's forces so effective. Individual Orc ships began reverting to their species' natural tendency toward chaotic aggression, attacking each other as much as the Imperial fleet. By the time their officers regained control, the Space Marine forces had seized the tactical advantage. Within hours, the Orc blockade of Terra was shattered. The surviving greenskin vessels fled toward the outer system, their discipline broken and their coordination destroyed. For the first time since the war began, the Imperium had achieved a clear victory against the beast's forces. But Vulcan knew this was only the beginning of a much longer and more difficult struggle. The intelligence gathered during the battle for the Sol system revealed the true scope of the threat facing humanity. The beast's empire now controlled over 3,000 star systems and showed no signs of slowing its expansion. Their industrial capacity had grown beyond Imperial ability to calculate. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands, and their ground forces were estimated to exceed 1 trillion individual orcs. Most disturbing of all, analysis of captured equipment and interrogation of prisoners suggested that the beast's enhancements were spreading. Other orc warlords were beginning to display similar improvements in tactical thinking and technological capability. If the transformation reached a critical mass, if enough greenskin leaders developed the same enhanced intelligence as the beast, then even the return of the primarchs would not be sufficient to save the Imperium. "We cannot win through conventional warfare," Vulcan announced at the Emergency War Council convened in the deepest levels of the Imperial Palace. "The enemy's numbers and industrial capacity are too great. Every day we delay, they become stronger while we grow weaker. Our only chance is to strike directly at the source of their power." The plan that emerged from those desperate conferences was audacious beyond reason. Rather than attempting to reconquer the territories lost to the Orc Empire, Imperial forces would concentrate everything they had into a single massive assault on Ulanor itself. The beast had to be killed, and his enhancing artifact destroyed before the transformation of Orc society could reach the point of irreversible change. The Second Ulanor Crusade would require every asset the Imperium possessed, over 1 million space marines from dozens of chapters, the entire remaining strength of the Imperial Navy, Titan legions from every Forge world still loyal to Mars, Imperial Guard regiments numbering in the billions. It would be the largest military operation in 10,000 years of Imperial history. But even as the massive fleet began assembling, more bad news arrived from the front lines. The beast was not waiting passively for the Imperial assault. Orc forces were pressing their offensive on multiple fronts, their advance accelerating as if they somehow knew about the Imperium's plans. World after world fell to the green tide. Their populations either fled or consumed by the endless appetite for war that drove greenskin society. The final catalyst came when long-range reconnaissance revealed construction activity in the Ulanor system that defied comprehension. The beast was not just fortifying his capital world. He was building something that would change the nature of warfare itself. Orbital installations on a scale that dwarfed even the most ambitious Imperial engineering projects. Weapons that could crack planets from across star systems. Defenses that would make Ulanor effectively immune to conventional attack. If the construction was allowed to continue, if the beast completed whatever he was building, then the war would be over before it truly began. The Imperium would face an enemy protected by defenses that could not be breached and armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets without risk to themselves. The attack had to be launched immediately, before the window of opportunity closed forever. Vulcan stood on the bridge of the Flame-wrought and watched the greatest fleet in human history prepare for departure. Over 10,000 ships filled the space around Terra, from massive battleships whose firepower could level continents to small scout vessels whose speed would be crucial for reconnaissance and communication. The sight should have filled him with confidence, but instead he felt only grim determination. "This is our last chance," he told his senior officers. "If we fail here, if the beast completes his preparations, then the Imperium will fall within a generation. Everything our father built, everything we have fought to preserve for 10 millennia, will be lost to the green tide." The journey to Ulanor took weeks, the massive fleet forced to travel through real space to avoid the psychic storms that made warp travel dangerous near Orc-controlled territory. During the long voyage, final preparations were made and strategies refined. Intelligence reports painted an increasingly grim picture of what awaited them at their destination. Ulanor had been transformed beyond recognition. The planet's surface was covered with weapons installations and defensive positions arranged in patterns that showed strategic thinking far beyond typical Orc capabilities. Orbital defense platforms ringed the world in multiple layers, their firepower sufficient to destroy entire battle fleets. The space around the planet crawled with Orc vessels, their numbers so vast that sensors could not provide accurate counts. At the center of it all sat a construct that defied classification. Part space station, part weapon, part fortress, it dwarfed anything in Imperial records. Its very existence seemed to violate the laws of physics, its mass creating gravitational effects that influenced the movement of nearby asteroids. Whatever the beast was building, it was approaching completion. The first phase of the assault began at maximum weapons range. Imperial battleships launching bombardment patterns designed to clear paths through the Orc defensive positions. But the enemy was ready for them. Void shields activated across the planet's surface, creating overlapping protective fields that absorbed the incoming fire without significant damage. Return fire from the orbital platforms began immediately, their accuracy and coordination suggesting targeting systems that rivaled Imperial technology. The space battle that followed was unlike anything in military history. Over 15,000 ships clashed in the void around Ulanor, their weapons fire creating energy discharges visible from neighboring star systems. Imperial vessels fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant not just their own destruction, but the end of human civilization. But the Orcs fought with newfound tactical awareness, their formations maintaining discipline under fire, while concentrating overwhelming firepower against individual Imperial ships. For 6 days, the battle raged without decisive result. Imperial forces managed to establish footholds in the outer defensive rings, but their advance stalled in the face of resistance that grew stronger as they approached the planet. Orc reinforcements arrived steadily from across their empire, their numbers seeming inexhaustible. Meanwhile, Imperial casualties mounted at an unsustainable rate. It was Vulcan himself who broke the stalemate. Rather than continuing the grinding attritional warfare that favored the numerically superior Orcs, the Primarch proposed a desperate gamble. A small strike force would attempt to reach the planet's surface and locate the artifact that was enhancing the beast's capabilities. If it could be destroyed, the Orc forces would revert to their normal chaotic state, and the Imperial fleet could achieve victory. The mission was essentially suicidal. The strike force would have to penetrate multiple layers of orbital defenses, survive landing on a planet covered with weapons installations, and fight their way through millions of Orcs to reach a target whose exact location was unknown. The chances of success were minimal, but it was the only option that offered any hope of victory. Vulcan led the assault personally, his drop pod launching from the flame wrought at the head of a formation comprising the elite troops from dozens of Space Marine chapters. The journey through Ulanor's orbital defenses was a nightmare of fire and destruction, defensive weapons tracking their descent with mechanical precision. Over half the drop pods were destroyed before reaching the surface, their occupants vaporized by energy weapons or torn apart by interceptor missiles. Those who survived the landing found themselves in a hellscape that defied description. Ulanor's surface had been transformed into a single vast fortress, its terrain sculpted into defensive positions that channeled attackers into carefully prepared kill zones. Orc forces waited in prepared positions, their weapons ready and their coordination perfect. This was not the chaotic melee typical of greenskin warfare. This was professional military resistance conducted by soldiers who understood tactics and strategy. The fighting was brutal beyond measure. Space Marines who had never known defeat found themselves being systematically outmaneuvered by enemies they had always dismissed as primitive savages. Orc artillery struck with mathematical precision, their barrages timed to catch Imperial forces in the open during movement between defensive positions. Greenskin air support appeared at exactly the right moments to break up Imperial advances, their pilots demonstrating flying skills that rivaled the best Imperial aviators. But Vulcan pressed forward with grim determination, his enhanced senses slowly tracking the source of the psychic emanations that were coordinating the Orc defense. The artifact was somewhere in the depths of the planet, buried beneath kilometers of rock and reinforced armor. Reaching it would require fighting through the most heavily defended positions in the history of warfare. The deeper they penetrated into Ulanor's underground complexes, the stranger their environment became. The architecture was wrong, built to proportions that hurt human eyes to observe. The very air seemed thick with malevolent intelligence, as if the planet itself was watching their advance with hostile awareness. Equipment began malfunctioning in ways that suggested more than simple technical failure. It was in the deepest levels of the fortress that they finally encountered the beast himself. The creature that awaited them bore little resemblance to any orc in Imperial records. Standing over 15 meters tall, his body was a fusion of organic tissue and technological enhancement that created something entirely new. His eyes held intelligence that was both alien and terrifying, a calculating awareness that seemed to see through flesh and bone to examine the souls beneath. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that no natural throat could produce. "So the corpse god sends his remaining son to face me. How appropriate. You will witness the end of your species' dominance before you join your father in irrelevance." The duel between Vulcan and the beast was not just a physical confrontation, but a battle between two philosophies of existence. The primarch fought for humanity's right to exist as individual conscious beings, each person valuable in their own right. The beast represented something else entirely, a vision of existence where individual identity was subsumed into a collective consciousness that pursued efficiency over humanity. Both combatants were beings of immense power, their strength and endurance far beyond normal biological limits. Vulcan's hammer met the beast's claws in exchanges that shattered the ground beneath their feet and sent shock waves through the surrounding structure. But it gradually became clear that the beast possessed advantages that went beyond simple physical enhancement. The creature seemed to anticipate Vulcan's attacks before they were launched, responding to tactics that had not yet been executed. His movements displayed coordination with his environment that suggested the entire planet was serving as an extension of his senses. Most disturbing of all, the beast appeared to be learning from the combat, his responses improving with each exchange. The turning point came when Vulcan realized that he was not fighting just the beast, but the artifact that enhanced him. The alien technology was observing the battle, analyzing the primarch's capabilities, and providing real-time tactical advice to its host. To defeat the beast, Vulcan would have to find a way to strike at both targets simultaneously. The solution came from an understanding of his own nature that had been revealed during his long sleep. Vulcan was not just a warrior, but a smith, a creator of things that served humanity's needs. His hammer Doomtreader was not just a weapon, but a tool for shaping reality according to his will. And in this moment of ultimate crisis, he would use it to forge something new. Drawing upon reserves of power that he had never accessed before, Vulcan struck not at the beast's body, but at the space around him, his hammer impacting reality itself and creating a localized distortion in the fabric of existence. The effect was to separate the beast from the artifact that enhanced him, if only for a few crucial seconds. In that moment of separation, the creature revealed what he truly was without his technological enhancement. Still dangerous, still intelligent, but no longer the transcendent being that had threatened the existence of humanity. Vulcan's second blow ended the duel, Doomtreader crushing the beast's skull and sending psychic shockwaves throughout the Orc Empire. But the artifact remained, its alien presence still radiating malevolent intelligence from somewhere deeper in the planetary structure. Vulcan knew that destroying the beast was only half the battle. As long as the enhancement technology existed, another leader could claim it and begin the process again. The artifact had to be destroyed completely, even if doing so required his own life. The device, when he finally found it, was both beautiful and horrifying. A crystalline structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human senses could perceive. its faceted surfaces reflecting images of futures that might have been. It was ancient beyond human measurement, possibly predating the evolution of life in the galaxy. And it was intelligent, aware of his presence, and actively resisting his attempts to approach. The final battle was not physical, but psychological, a contest of wills fought in the spaces between thoughts. The artifact showed Vulcan visions of what the galaxy could become if Orc society was allowed to evolve beyond its current limitations. Worlds where greenskin efficiency created perfect order, where individual suffering was eliminated through the abolition of individual consciousness. It was a seductive vision, a promise of peace through the surrender of everything that made existence meaningful. But Vulcan had seen enough of peace purchased through the elimination of choice. His response was to show the artifact his own vision of humanity's future, a galaxy where conscious beings chose their own paths and accepted responsibility for their choices. It was messier than the artificial perfection offered by alien technology, but it was authentic in a way that mechanical efficiency could never match. When Doomtreader finally struck the artifact, the explosion that followed could be felt across multiple star systems. The ancient device did not simply break, it ceased to exist, its destruction creating a vacuum in reality that pulled everything nearby into non-existence. Vulcan himself was caught in the collapse, his body torn apart by forces that operated outside the normal laws of physics. But his sacrifice was not in vain. With the artifact destroyed, the enhancement effect that had transformed Orc society began to fade. Across the Ulanor system and throughout the Beast's empire, greenskin forces reverted to their natural state of chaotic aggression. The perfect coordination that had made them so dangerous dissolved into the kind of internecine warfare that characterized normal Orc behavior. The Imperial fleet, now facing enemies that fought according to familiar patterns, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Without the Beast's strategic leadership and technological enhancement, the Orc Empire collapsed with startling speed. Individual warlords began fighting each other for dominance, their forces turning on former allies in struggles for control of territory and resources. Within months, the greatest threat to the Imperium since the Horus Heresy had been reduced to scattered bands of raiders operating without coordination or strategic purpose. The massive fleets that had darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds dispersed into smaller groups that could be hunted down and destroyed by conventional Imperial forces. The nightmare was ending, but the cost had been enormous. Hundreds of worlds lay in ruins, their populations dead or scattered. The Imperial Navy had lost over half its total strength, and dozens of Space Marine chapters had been reduced to a fraction of their original numbers. The Adeptus Mechanicus would require centuries to rebuild their technological infrastructure. Most painfully of all, the Primarch Vulcan was gone, his body consumed in the destruction of the artifact that had enhanced the beast. In the aftermath of victory, as Imperial forces began the long process of rebuilding what had been destroyed, scholars and historians struggled to understand what had nearly happened. The beast had represented more than just another Orc threat. He had been the harbinger of a possible future where humanity was not the dominant species in the galaxy, where human consciousness itself might have been absorbed into something alien and incomprehensible. The war had revealed fundamental weaknesses in Imperial strategy and organization that could not be ignored. The Imperium's reliance on established doctrine and hierarchical command structures had nearly cost them everything when facing an enemy that operated outside normal parameters. Only the return of a Primarch and his willingness to sacrifice everything had prevented total defeat. Changes began immediately. New defensive protocols were established to guard against similar threats. Intelligence gathering was enhanced to provide earlier warning of unusual enemy activities. Most importantly, the strict limitations that had governed the deployment of Space Marines were relaxed, allowing for faster response to existential threats. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The Imperium had learned that it was not invincible, that enemies existed that could challenge human dominance through methods other than chaos corruption. The galaxy was a more dangerous place than previously imagined, filled with threats that could emerge from unexpected directions and challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. The War of the Beast had lasted just over 2 years, but its effects would be felt for millennia. It marked the end of an era of complacency and the beginning of a new age of vigilance. The Imperium survived, but it was changed by the experience, humbled by the knowledge of how close it had come to extinction. In the deepest archives of the Imperial Palace, sealed records preserve the complete history of those dark years when the Imperium almost fell. They serve as a reminder to future generations that humanity's survival is never guaranteed, that eternal vigilance is the price of existence in a galaxy filled with hostile intelligences that seek the destruction of everything the Emperor built. The beast is dead, his empire scattered to the winds. But somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other threats are stirring, other intelligences are planning, other challenges to human supremacy are being prepared. The war never truly ends. It only changes form, adapts to new circumstances, and continues the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between consciousness and oblivion, between the light of human achievement and the darkness that seeks to extinguish it forever. And in that eternal war, the Imperium endures, scarred but unbroken, carrying forward the torch of human civilization through whatever trials the future may bring. The Emperor protects, but that protection comes at a price measured in blood, sacrifice, and the constant willingness to pay whatever cost survival demands. The War of the Beast taught that lesson more clearly than any conflict in 10,000 years of Imperial history. The price of existence is eternal vigilance. The price of survival is everything.